We'll begin. Welcome, everybody. I had a list of all of my pre-opening buttons to press. I think I did pretty good. So, welcome to the waiting room virtual event Encore. One of the events in early August we had to postpone, and so this is where we are today. I'm glad that we're able to come back. We have some familiar faces and some new faces who will hopefully become familiar faces, and it's just a great process. So my name is Matthew Mejia, CEO and publisher of Nervous Ghost Press. Excited to be here on a Sunday afternoon for those on my, I guess, side of the world, an early evening maybe for some of the other ones, but it's a great time to fit hopefully as many people. We're going to have a lot more virtual events moving forward. During the pandemic, there were many, and what I realized is having a virtual event where we come together online, because we have such a wide range of people and time zones that we can kind of capture, then it has to be part of what we do. Connect with us. I need to update this one of these days. I don't know if Elon Musk is going to get mad at us if we still have Twitter on here, so we got to change it to the X. But stay connected with us on our social media. It's on your screen now: Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, our website, www.nervousghostpress.org. And my email goes directly to me, ghosts@nervousghostpress.org. We will, after the readings today, have a Q&A discussion, and so feel free to text me, message me, email me. I'll be checking on it here and there throughout the event. And also, if you're on YouTube, comment a question, something for anybody, and at the very end, we'll have a cool discussion. These discussions are a great way to hear from the artists and the speakers and kind of who they are as a human, as a person. They're not scripted. It's not pre-done. It's not for performance or anything like that. It's just a great way to speak and get to know us, and it's very nice. So we have, of course, our new journal, The Waiting Room. Cover was painted and designed by our editor-in-chief, Ghost Dennis, who one of these days I'm going to create in the office a separate section, and I'll plant him in there, put a camera in his face, and make him do all the talking. But we're sending Dennis some good vibes, and when he watches this later, we'll see him one of these days. And so very quickly, before I'm going to introduce our press, Nervous Ghost Press, officially incorporated as a nonprofit in 2021. And we stand for the arts and the artists, and we stand for our community and community arts advocacy. We have a community arts workspace about 15 miles of East Los Angeles. And if you are a singer, writer, musician, performer, recorder, rapper, painter, illustrator, whatever it is, use the space. That's what it's here for. There are two computers over there. You can't see them, but that's where I'm pointing. They're in that direction. And there's internet. There's AC for when it's warm, but I could turn it off when it's cold. There is a toaster. I guess you call it a toaster oven. It has a rotisserie in it too. And one of these days, I want to put corn in there and kind of rotisserie corn. I've never done it, but it sounds like a super awesome idea. But this space is your space. So email me, go to the website, find the link. The tab on top, it says Community Workspace. Send me, fill out the form. It says, what are you working on? What kind of tech do you need? I'll let you know what we have, what's available. But again, this is for you, for the community, and we will always stand for the community. I absolutely believe that writing saves lives, and arts is our greatest unifier that we have as humans and people, and it just has to be something that we grow together. And so to introduce our first speaker, or I guess I'm introducing the first speaker, but I'm excited. This is someone that I don't know yet. And just like in our in-person open mics, there's new faces that come in, and then they show up the next week and the next week and the next week, and it's really awesome. But please, everybody, welcome Megan Wildhood.
I'm excited to be here. It's my first time. I'd like to read a couple poems from, I have two books out, and this one is inspired by childhood sibling rivalry. It's called No Dinosaurs Before Bed. On my Saturdays, we are skipping, I demanded, after a warm-up round of hopscotch, to the fairgrounds an hour before they open. I ask, What does Jamie do on her Saturdays? She gets one a month. I get one a month. Well, Mom stays home with our new brother. It's special time with Dad, and it's a way to give me and Jamie a break from each other. Our bed in the room where we share takes up most of the space. We each get a skinny area of carpet next to our side for toys. Mine are in plastic mesh baskets until Jamie takes out my T-Rex and Longneck and Stegosaurus for her dolls to ride. That's probably happening right now, as Dad turns coins into candy, cotton and all else. He snags a bouquet of balloons that nod along to the carousel's music, where I get to ride life-size versions of My Little Ponies. Jamie only got 5 Daddy Saturdays because Dad signed her up for a Wood Fairy Princess take on Girl Scouts. They were gone every Thursday night and a weekend every other month. My Saturdays continued. Endless. Fair days until the fair didn't come back. A face painter worked up a sunset on my forehead the year they set him up next to a paleontologist whose midlife crisis revised her passions. She now made milky chocolate molds of any prehistoric creature you wanted. So I asked for Finn. Finn? The name of her Stegosaurus, Dad would have to explain. I couldn't have a bite till after dinner. I asked. When my sister graduated from the princess program, long after the fair dispersed, I asked if that meant she had become a queen. I asked how she became a princess. She asked if I thought you could teach something like that. I asked if she knew how much longer we'd be sharing a room, and plucked one of her Disney princesses off of Finn by its hair. I whirled it slowly over my head until it slipped away from me, the shine on its dress making the skirt too stiff to billow and slow its fall. Jamie seized Finn by his tail and slung him out our window as the princess arced headfirst, cleanly into her nose. She rushed both hands up to her face and cried and cried. We only had to share a room for 5 more months, but we had to move before I could find Finn. That poem is from my book, Long Division, which is a chapbook that was published in 2017 about, all of the poems are about my sister and the estrangement that I've experienced with her in adulthood. I will read, I think, one more. This is from my book, Boat as If Laden with Snow, which came out in May of this year. I will read the poem called The Eighth Plague. The book of Exodus in the Old Testament has it this way. God inflicted 10 calamities on the nation of Egypt to persuade Pharaoh to release God's people from slavery, even though God was preventing Pharaoh from freeing God's people. This sounds like human logic. And the plagues aren't in any sort of discernible order either. They don't strike alphabetically, or by subject matter, or by height, or in order of least bad to worst. Death of the firstborn does seem like the worst to me. I'd have been a goner. But boils, the 6th plague, seems worse than turning water into blood, which God does first. And that's just creepy. And the one with the locusts. Did God send a billion bugs from heaven, or is swarming the kind of thing locusts just do? Locusts are usually solitary, unless there's a drought, followed by rapid vegetation growth. The serotonin release this triggers causes these introverts to get gregarious, breed like mad, and hoard. Sure, this can instigate economic and agricultural damage, but it's been happening for thousands of years wherever locusts live. I sympathize with the scripture writers, though. When I'm facing powers far beyond my puny control that are making me miserable, the first thing I do, usually, is hurl a plague of screams at every place I think God is, and especially at every place I think God is not. Thank you very much. It was really lovely to be with you all. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of you read today.
Thank you. Wait, hold on. My face is not. Wait. What did I do? There we go. I clicked on the run. There was like a different button over there. Thank you. And Megan, I was thinking about the human logic really reminded me of just this past month, and I'm going to get into that at one of these points. But the questioning of the locust and is that just what they do, and the philosophy behind it. I think the philosophy behind so much of what we see these days is kind of missing, and asking these questions and the I guess the awful quality of human logic, I suppose, is something that gives art such a powerful oh my gosh, angle and anchor. But thank you, and I hope that we can definitely discuss. I have a lot of ideas just based on what you said. I think we can talk about things. I love meeting and speaking with people these days, especially. But we'll definitely keep in touch. Thank you, Megan. All right, up next is Linda Raven Woods.
Hi, everybody. So today I'm going to read some selections from my latest poetry collection, which is actually a biography in verse of the actor River Phoenix. I thought this would be a good time to promote the collection since we are approaching the 30th anniversary of his passing. And not only is the collection my first kind of foray into writing this type of poetry, biography in verse. But it was also something I wanted to do to kind of have a retrospect on a life that was this kid, who was really trying to find himself and really trying to navigate through this life that was so tragic. And, there was so much exploitation really from the time he was a kid to the time that he passed. That was really all he knew, and struggling to overcome all the various traumas of his life. I also kind of wanted it to be a reflection on celebrity culture. So I'm going to dive into it here. The first selection I'll read is called The Intersection. It's one of those great and semi-tragic coincidences that characterize your entire life, River. How it all began less than 2 miles from where it ended. That's because it all starts not with you yet, but a girl named Arlene who dreams big, who stands on the corner of Santa Monica Boulevard, back turned squarely to the east, and all she's escaped there. The young husband who didn't understand, who was too clueless, who will wake up or come home from work to find her gone, and the parents who meant well, like they all did in those post-war years, but who smothered her in the well-meaning. The summer of love is already 2 years past, but Arlene never got the memo. This day she will stand on Santa Monica Boulevard, less than 2 miles from where your life will end on Sunset, where a handsome hippie will flag her down in his minivan. Hey, babe, you need a ride? Or whatever line he feeds her with, but it's enough. He's on the run too, considers he's much too young to die in Vietnam, too poor to buy his way out of it, and has a crying baby daughter whose eyes he could no longer bear to meet, even though he'll go on to make 3 more. Arlene hesitates less than a second, her decision made. She climbs inside his van, feels safe there, safe enough to create a legacy. It is all mapped out from here how the homeless girl named Arlene will transform herself into a woman named Hart, how the seed that is planted in this moment becomes you, her eternal flowing river, how one day she will pride herself on the initiative it took to make you happen. The van, their van now, crosses the intersection of Santa Monica and Sunset, takes a sharp turn north. She will say it is somewhere along the way on the banks of the Colorado River where you are conceived. The second poem is called Birth on the Peppermint Farm. This is it. The story of a life that begins like they all do, dancing out of a womb, but there the similarity ends, because this is a life that begins on a barren farmhouse floor. Your mother, Arlene, who'd refused to let any doctor near, moans as she pushes you into the world. It was your debut performance, and even then, a modest crowd was gathered to watch and cheer the moment of your appearance. A cute little bugger, said the farm's owner, the first to hold you, still wet from your 4-hour ride through that slippery tunnel of darkness, delivered to the light a fresh noonday, the sharp scent of peppermint that clings to Arlene's skin, an explosion of newness to your tiny, barely defined nostrils, tangy and sharp. That first taste of air, your cries the first sign of want, of need. 20 minutes after your birth, Arlene walks across a field to show you off. 23 years later, your life will come full circle, tracing back to where it began like those leaping salmon in the opening shot of My Own Private Idaho, the ones that were supposed to represent your character's flight to swim upstream against the current. And in the same way a crowd gathered to watch you enter the world, one gathers now to see you leave it, your body writhing like the speared fish that once made you cry. In the minutes before death, it is said, all memories play out like a flashing movie. Did your mind then play it all back? Did your dying brain conjure the light, the blue of an August sky at noon, the sun that hurt your still too delicate eyes, the whiff of peppermint that lingers like a half-forgotten cologne? Let's see, I'm going to skip some of these here. So this one's going to flash forward a few years. And I will warn, this poem could be triggering because it does talk about his sexual abuse as a child. Because by the time he was 4, his parents were involved in a cult in South America. And part of the practice of that cult was the belief that children needed to be sexually initiated by the age of 4. Now, how complicit his parents were in this, how ignorant they were of it, that's still debatable, but this was the poem that came from that. From Rio to River, what's in a name? In those early years, you, a child, a boy named River who learned early how to answer to Rio, learning to navigate your course, this thing called life. At this age, you only know the sticky heat of Costa Rica, summer, where you've learned to speak in Spanish, to think in Spanish, where Spanish rolls off like your native tongue, and the locals all call you El Nino Rubio que canta. I don't speak Spanish, so. The blonde child who sings, a moment too fleeting, until the children of God get hold of you, convince John and Arlene how you are so pure, such a beauty, how God's light shines within you, and how it would be a sin to not share the gift, the bounty that is you. As if hoarding God's light could be a thing. Years later, you will remember like coming out of a black recess, the musky scent of adult vaginas and the men who touched you under the pretense of coming that is close to the glory of God. You are 4 years old, your penis deemed holy, but what miracles can a 4-year-old penis possibly perform? Repeat, you are 4 years old. Years later, a Hollywood movie set, the director commands, think of what hurts you most as you learn to cry on cue. Remembering a boy who was once called Rio before the children of God stripped you bare to your naked flesh, reverted your course from a boy named Rio to that murky river you became. All right, so I'm going to flash forward again several years. Some of these are dramatic monologues told through various individuals in his life. This is one I wrote from the perspective of his father. It's called Searching for Father Figures. It's 4 p.m. I down another shot of Guinness, my boy's favorite beer, and one of the few things we share. I'm waiting on him to appear so we can sit together and so he can make more empty promises to me how things are going to change, how he's going to leave this evil thing called Hollywood behind us, how we're going to get back to the land, grow and harvest our own vegetables like we used to do. I read the papers. I know what they all say about him, about me, but I want to shout to them and to him, boy, don't you know that Rob Reiner is not your dad, and Robert Redford ain't your dad, and Sidney Poitier is not your dad, and Dan Aykroyd is not your dad, and Harrison Ford sure as hell is not your dad? And why does everybody think you need a father figure when you got one right here? Oh, here he comes, my boy. Watch all the heads turn, that golden mop. Yes, bartender, another Guinness on tap. We're going to sit and drink this out man to man. And in my dreams, he'll say, yes, Dad, let's do it. Let's hop that plane to Costa Rica tonight. We can be there by morning. A fresh start. But I watch him walk toward me and I know the reality. He'll only say, one more picture, Dad, just one more picture. We need the money. No, fuck the money, I say. Let Arlene keep the house in Florida. I'm talking just you and me. Dad, you're drunk, he says. You're always drunk when I see you. Then he says a whole lot more about how he's fucked up the way he is on account of how I'm fucked up the way I am. And before it's over, we're both crying. And I called to the bartender, two more. And we sat here for hours just this way, like that damn father and son from Cats in the Cradle, who were always going to have a good time then, if just one or the other of them could ever make that first step. Epilogue to this story. My son finally kept his promise. He came home to me all right. Only when he did, it was in a box. And the last two that I'll read here are from the perspective of his sister, Rain. And they're both called Little Papa because that's what she called him. Little Papa was what we called him, our big brother River. We called him our Little Papa because he took care of us all. It was Little Papa who made sure we ate, especially when Daddy's bad back had him down again. I just remember my Little Papa grabbing his guitar, saying to me, it'll be okay. I'll play my songs and the people will pay. We'll eat good tonight, I promise, my Little Papa would say and hug me. Sometimes we even sang together. Little Papa said the coin was twice as good if you got two blonde children instead of just one. The people passed us by, stopped and smiled or danced a little even, and tossed us their pennies. Little Papa, who knows their language, would tell them, gracias. We would take our coins, trade them in at the market for veggies and fruit. A good day on the corner meant we ate that night. We didn't think we were weird or poor. On a good night, my stomach was full of food, my heart full of songs. I thought every family should be so lucky as mine to have a Little Papa like mine who took care of us so good. Little Papa, too. By the time he was 15, he was already kind of gone from us, our Little Papa, our big brother River. It was the price he paid for being more father to us than brother. Eventually, we'd all find work in pictures, and of course, my little brother Joaquin is in his own orbit now, but it was my Little Papa who blazed that road, who piled all of us on his shoulders and held us up like they say old man Atlas held up the world. I don't think any of us realized till it was too late just how thin, how dreadfully skinny those shoulders were. I just know when I was little, I thought my Little Papa was like Superman. He could do anything, be anything, and I would always be safe when he was around. A little known fact, the night he died, he was tired, he had a cold, wasn't in the mood to hang, didn't feel like a party. It was my brother Joaquin who wanted to party down at the Viper, and I wasn't far behind. We'd just flown into town, two kids bedazzled by the Hollywood lights, not even old enough to be inside a club. Come on, my brother Joaquin begged River. They'll let us in if you're with us. He didn't want to go. He told us he was going to bed. We'd already walked away, been on plan B for the night, when we heard the footsteps. It was our little papa running to catch up to us, his guitar in hand, and we all knew what that meant. Truth was, he couldn't go to bed and go to sleep knowing he was turning us out to the Hollywood night and our own devices. If anything happens to you guys, he said in his big brother voice, and we didn't have to finish the rest. It was his way of reminding us he was responsible for us, that he was still our big brother Atlas holding us aloft. I couldn't have known only a few hours later how I would be the one to leap atop my little papa's body, holding him pinned to the concrete so he wouldn't hurt himself thrashing around the way he was doing. Even then, he was so strong and my arms grew so weak trying to hold him. I tried so hard, but I just couldn't hang on, couldn't keep him from going. I know I felt a moment when my little papa slipped away from me. I tried, I really did, but he grew so light in my arms. Thank you. Thank you.
I think I was muted, but that's okay.
Yeah, I am muted, and that's going to be on my tombstone. Now you're muted forever. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to start off with the poem that was in The Waiting Room. The Waiting Room, by the way, is one of my favorite poems by Elizabeth Bishop. And this poem is somewhat somewhat of an autobiography. When I was in high school, I liked the Fellini movies, and I wanted to be debonair and suave and be a sophisticated pleasure seeker like Marcello Mastroianni. But ultimately, I was just a vulnerable teenager. And this poem is called A High School Night Between 12:16 and 12:19. It's a glorious evening. The air's a warm tea. The moon winks a warning with its one good eye. I walk slowly beside you and wait for you to say something tender or look my way. We step into the park where my sister buried her hamsters. Horatio, Hubert the Hopeless, and Harold, named for the last Saxon king. You smell like your older sister, the French horn player, who sits beside me and plays too loud and flat. I almost blab about the Loudon Valley tennis match. Everyone counted on me to win so we could go to state. You scratch your nose 3 times, stifle a cough, then cough. My left sock sinks below my ankles again. I know every gain has to be paid for, but I discern white peonies peonies, which legend says help the love struck. So I wait agreeably, then say, I love you. You stare at a spot on my forehead and shake your head. The free life is best, you say. Then reach into your skirt and slip on a class ring. It's from Larry, you say. That average redhead basketball player 3 years ahead of us. I suffer a sucker punch to the stomach while my left sock sinks again, according to its nature. I shuffle to the playground to slump on a bench, designed to be a horse, llama, or who knows what. You evaporate into the dark. Stage left or right, it makes little difference. It's an old story that remains ever new. And if it happens to you, it breaks your heart in two. I reach into my jacket for a Robert Burns cigar. Several flicks later, the match catches fire. My pain, I assume, will in due course diminish according to the brightness of its stimulus. I rotate the cigar for better burn and improved flavor, then try to shrug like Marcello Mastroianni in La Dolce Vita. A breeze brushes the leaves of the ash trees, the warm-hearted ash trees that always try their best to bless. My waterproof Timex says 12:19. The church clock across the street says 12:16. Now this one right here, it goes back again, I remember, I don't know what it was like for you, being in the, when I went to school, 7th to 12th grade was in the same building, but 7th and 8th grade, they call middle school these days. And it was particularly a time of, you need to conform, and if you're not quite right, you get teased, like if you have, you dress funny, you have long hair, you're ugly, you're uncoordinated, or in some case, or if you're obese, for instance. And this is a poem about a woman, or I should say a young woman in middle school who's obese, and what it's like for her. I mean, what's it like for her to experience the people around her and have that come back to her? This is called Unlimited Bliss. Unlimited Bliss. Unlimited Bliss. I cry myself to sleep every night after mindless TV. They say I'd be thin if only I wanted to be, but they don't hear me weep when I eat and eat when I weep. As I hop off the bus near school, an old geezer behind me offers advice. Whoa, you could use some Slim Fast. Walking head held high to first period, boys flatten themselves against the lockers and say, wide load. Girls chime in, oink, oink, and moo, moo. In geography class, Mr. Benson lectures about a strange land where eyes flutter and bones arise. He then glares at me and says, when are you going to lose some pounds? You really are disgusting. In gym class, I'm the last one chosen as usual. Becky says, no one will touch me, even with gloves. When Mrs. Crane tells Ellen she must sit next to me, Ellen cries, and Mary comes to comfort her. She says, I know how you feel to sit there. I stay as still as possible to avoid causing agitation around me. If someone farts, they say it's me. When anybody in class has a birthday party, they invite everyone but me. When someone cracks a fat joke, I have to laugh. with the others. Otherwise, I'm called Grumpy Lumpy Dumpy. At Easter, Sally says, "We're going to have your leg for dinner." When I ride around the block, Donald says, "I never saw an elephant ride a bike before." I hate mirrors. I hate cameras. I hate dress shopping. The pitying looks from clerks who see nothing pretty fits me. Trying on dozens of items to find a couple that fit and that I can tolerate. Most items gape in weird places or tighten others. Those that fit generally have the ugliest colors you've ever seen. Bottom line, nothing fits or looks good. They say I'll never be a flight attendant, a waitress, secretary, or receptionist. And if I'm hired, I will make less money and never be promoted to supervisor. They say my face is pretty, and maybe I might get married if I lose a few tons. But even so, my husband will be penniless, ugly, or otherwise inferior. Once a doctor said, "You have a complex disorder of energy metabolism." He gave me a medication that stopped the cravings for 36 hours. It was like seeing the face of God. I never felt more control than his pills wore off. I'm not blaming anyone else but myself for the way I am. I no longer try to build myself up by saying, "I'm not fat. I have fat." After all, this is who I am. I'm fat. I like to eat more calories than I use up. I hate having to do something extra to be normal, while everybody else just has it handed to them. I'm powerless to stop the compulsion for sugar, white carbs, and fat, brownies, peanut butter, and things that are melted. Just 30 minutes after I've stuffed my face, I'm full, but my voice implores more, more, more. Every waking hour, every damn day. I prefer to be deaf, have a leg amputated, or be blind. When you're blind, people want to help you. No one wants to help you when you're fat. I will never be the pretty girl whose hair flounces, face flushed, as she falls on her bed, fresh from a date with someone who thinks she's beautiful. I know. Change is a small thing. It feeds on small victories. Narrow rays of possibility that crack through and slowly gain strength. One day that light will shine on me. One day I'll be consumed by bliss, unlimited bliss. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now for my last one. This is really a true story. Of course, I embellish it a bit, but this was in a newspaper a while back, and it's called "Man, Nature, God." Miss Priscilla took her Sunday morning stroll while I prayed at the church of my choice. Upon return, I noticed her bob and weave on the back porch. I detected the signs. She had swallowed fermented yeast from the pan I had left there. I thought, let her have her fun. It's her prerogative, her reward for earning the red ribbon at the county fair. When I bent down to give her a kiss, she quacked, then exploded with loud report into hundreds of pieces. I ran to the kitchen, covering my one good eye. with both hands. The district surgeon was summoned. His diagnosis, penetration of eye by flaying fragments of duck. He offered no hope for return of my optics, but as consolation provided his discounted rate. Beloved Miss Priscilla is in a better place. I'm practically blind, but my faith remains unbroken. I invite you to share the wonder of it all with us Sundays, 10 a.m. at the Fresh Life Church, corner of Bussey and Albert. Okay, next.
Thank you, Paul. And oh wait, I got your name on my face here. There we go. And I'm not muted. Last time I was muted a little bit. Kind of funny, but it happens to us. Thank you, Paul. And something that I thought about a lot while you were reading was the vulnerability that art allows us in a very powerful way. Because I think so many of us, we don't want to be vulnerable, or we try to have this persona of not being vulnerable, and yet it's in here. It's just in here all the time. And being able to put those words on the paper. I always tell my students, if we write on a piece of paper, we can rip it up, we can crunch it, set it on fire, throw it away, chew it, do whatever we want. But we have that agency, we have that ability to manipulate, to control what is otherwise normally uncontrollable. And we gain that power from when we are powerless, like you spoke about. And so thank you for being here, Paul. And I'm excited to talk afterwards and have some questions. I'm thinking of all these questions to ask everybody. So everybody should feel like they're put on the spot, right? Maybe? No? But thank you, Paul. All right, everybody, if you are interested in reading Paul's work, get yourself a copy, of course, of The Waiting Room at www.nervousghostpress.org. I think I added an extra W there, but you all know what I'm talking about. On your screen, we have the social medias again. Reach out anytime, and this is my promise to everybody. If you email me, I will reply. If I don't reply quickly, email me again, because sometimes it gets lost, or I open it and I try to mark it unread, but I end up marking it read, and then I miss it. But always reach out. I'll always reply if you have questions about art, community, what we're doing, if you want to be involved in all of the in-betweens. I'm always happy to discuss with other people. And so up next, we have Julia Gaitan. So thank you, Paul. Welcome, Julia.
Hi, everyone. So great to hear all of your work. And yeah, welcome to everyone on YouTube. So I wanted to start off with a new poem. It's called The Elusive Factories, and it's just about how we are very comfortable with how we live, for the most part. And sometimes we just don't sit and think about where all these things are coming from that make our life so comfortable. Here goes. So my newest, The Elusive Factories. I've never seen the factories. I have only heard of how all these things are made, but I've never seen the factories. I have felt the greasy screen under my fingertips. I have held the silver-colored fork to my mouth. I have tasted the box food. I have only tasted. I have only touched. I have felt my belly full. I have regretted the heaviness from this food created in factories, but I have never seen the factories. I have smelled the scent of shit while driving down the 110 South near the ports that store the containers that hold countless things: plastic things, glass things, ceramic things, pharmaceutical things, human beings being treated as things. A place where things come and go, from the factories to homes, from homes to packing zones, things that make us feel more alone. But I've never seen the factories. And though I've never seen the elusive factories, I have seen how these factory-made things are factoring into my valued interactions, constructing and deconstructing my desires, morals, and values. I know these factories have definite effects to my being, no matter if I've never seen the factories. The next one I'm reading is a little short one. It's just called Let Me Stir. And it's about being labeled being quote unquote too much. And I think that sometimes as women, we get that a lot, like you're being too much. So I kind of wrote this. Let me steer in my own bitterness. Let the grinds flavor my taza. Let the milk flow inside of me until the black turns caramel brown, to finally be sweet enough to be handled. So that's that one. This next poem I wrote for my ex-husband, and I remember I kind of told him, I like when you cry, and he took it the wrong way. And so I wrote a poem about it. And so I wrote this after our divorce, but I just thought it was important to read. So it's called Your Eyes. I like how your eyes look after you cry. The gloss over your corneas look as if you stared at the sun for too long and your eyes were forced to look away because of the burn. Not because of the hurt, but because this highlighted pigment makes me think of how your eyes might have looked as a child in Salem, Oregon, running through tall grasses with a slight overbite before the braces, before the height, but always with wild searching eyes. But it's just a thought of who you were, who I thought you'd be. Were you ever carefree? It makes me think of you as a boy who was once full of wonder, hopes, and dreams, a boy who believed in good and kindness and equity and truth, someone with the intent of exploring the world full of questions, looking forward towards the future. I like how the green in your eyes become more pronounced from the mediated redirected light bouncing off their watery bed of hurt. Like the green flash of the sunset, you seem happier at the pinnacle. When you're starting to wind down, I like the dash of hope. No, not the sight of you being in pain, but the sight of you starting to feel better. I like the cautious smile that wrinkles the edges of your usually stern eyes. The wrinkles that remind me that you weren't always so cold. You weren't always so distant. That you weren't always so careful of being free. That you weren't always so careless with others. That you weren't always the man who hurt me. And this next poem is about kind of changing our perspective of how things are viewed. It's called Night Sweats. Okay, slightly after 3 a.m., I'm startled awake by a stifled scream. I wonder, is it mine, or is the sound coming from the night's fabric ripping and letting out a muffled gasp, slipping out of lights and allowing shadows to step out and steadily explore? My body is drenched from the sweat that precipitates from my skin's pores, and I am cold. I shiver and pull my covers to my chin as the fan lightly hums the melody of hot summer nights, transforming to mornings in the fall where you can smell the death of leaves. It's leaving me crisp, and I can hear the ruffling from afar. Horrified of the unknown, the wind blows. I take my first awoken breath reluctantly, and I realize that I am indeed alone. Alone to face the emptiness of what's left and the everythingness and nothingness that is right now. Alone with the thoughts that make my chest feel heavy and leave my insides feeling hollow. My mind racing and being so loud. The quiet is deafening because it emboldens and italicizes thought. I pause, and now I choose to think of what is good about the scene. My thoughts shift to gratitude. In the dark, I can see traces of long shadows reflected on the furniture and walls. They are my companions, and we sit silently, appreciating one another's existence. Light lines from the blinds stretched along the ceiling, and my being feels seen. I'm warm in this room. The heater lightly hums melodies that calm, that snugly wrap my body and make me feel protected and secure. The cure to my fear of the unknown is knowing what is, and I'm here, alive and well. That's all. Thank you guys for your time and for the space.
Thank you, Julia. The first one with the factories and the cool wordplay with factories, it made me think about, for a while I was always curious. Everybody has the like, how are hot dogs made and all that kind of stuff. But I'm like, what makes the machines that makes the machines? And I was like, oh man, like how far can we go? And then the kind of the philosophy of it again, and how art is so connected to who we are as people and the philosophy and everything in between. And then you have the perspectives. Just I'm all about playing with perspectives, and it's so cool with writing and with art how we can kind of step out of our brain and enter someone else's brain, but while it's influenced by our brain being influenced by theirs all at the same time, and then we write something that just makes us feel better, and it's strong. Like you said at the very end, you're here, and we're not going anywhere. And so thank you, Julia. All right, we have two speakers left today, and then afterwards we have our Q&A. So if anybody's watching, while you're watching, text again on any of the social media, send out a question or email, or in YouTube, I have the screen right here, so that's the easiest way for me to look at it. And then, of course, speakers think of questions to ask each other, because it's always a great thing to talk with each other and kind of get a cool first person view with us, and kind of where a poem came from, what the process was, and just get a very kind of real answer. And so up next is Amy Haddad.
Thank you. And hello to my fellow poets and to the people on YouTube. I'm going to read the poem that was in the waiting room and a couple more from my poetry collection. Please listen carefully. Thank you for using our specialty pharmacy. Please listen carefully as menu options have recently changed. If you are a person, press 1. If you are a patient, press 2. If you would like to refill a prescription, press 1. For injectable drugs, press 1. For oral drugs, press 2. If you have multiple sclerosis or rheumatoid arthritis, please press 1. If you have ulcerative colitis, please press 2. No pun intended. Press 3 if you have any type of cancer. To go back to the beginning, when you were a person without cancer, before you took these drugs that keep you alive, press the star key. So a lot of my writing comes from experiences of being a patient. I'm a nurse too. And I'm also a family caregiver, as I think all of us will be at some point in our life. So I think there's a lot of things that go on in healthcare that happen outside of the purview of the health professionals. So these next two poems are from my collection called An Otherwise Healthy Woman. And the first one is called Making Camp. The hall to intensive care is always lit. At night, families and others, unprepared, no gear or supplies, make camp in the waiting rooms, retreat to corners, arrange makeshift pillow forts, lay claim to sofas, drape and shape with sheets to draw property lines. Downstream, the more private consultation room sleeps too, but reeks of bad news. The tinny heave of the coffee machine marks time over the family burrowed under the information desk. They stay close in case something changes, hover at the end of the bed 10 minutes every hour. At dawn, they bend, stiff and rumpled at the sinks, splash water on their faces, avoiding any glimpses of their mirrored lives, and pat dry with harsh paper towels. They lean against walls to get the best signal, texting, talking, and casing out who might still be there. And the final one I'm going to read is about taking care of my husband when he was in a hospital. When you're a health professional and then you're also the spouse or the caregiver, it's a very troubling space to be in, about knowing and also being afraid. And so I wanted to capture this. It's called My Role as the Wife. I am the wife. My name is written on the whiteboard in his room between the date and the nurse's name that changes every 12 hours. I am a permanent member of the company. My most frequent line is, I am the wife, not I am his wife. The possessive pronoun is lost under the hospital bed with his shoes. My part varies little from day to day. My husband speaks off script. He talks about angels or other visions, except when he has a seizure. Either way, interrupting or convulsing, he is ignored by the rest of the cast. I cheat and write notes on my palms. Sometimes I read right from the page and memorize the lead physician's lines, then repeat them to each fresh team. We should work from the same script. Even so, the other actors have new pages every day that I do not see. I must improvise. The director loves spontaneity. Just go with it, he whispers from the wings. My blocking is uninspired. Mostly I stand by the bed where my husband lies. When the call light is on, I cross left downstage to the door, looking for help, waiting for a nurse to pick up the cue. My final scene is full of cliches, empty reassurances, backward glances. I kiss his hot forehead, whisper goodbye, start out by drug carts and dirty linens, then turn back into his room to secure a parting promise from the night nurse. Call me if anything changes. I have one more line. I mean it. I say with feeling every night. The nurses nod, but never call. I am a bit player. What I say does not drive the plot. I exit to the elevator, barely taking in the road on my drive home. The bed, like the house, is empty. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I think a lot of the power that comes from art and what we're doing when we're writing is that we can write about the real stuff that happens in life and not the romanticized versions of it. Yet we can still kind of add that romantic element and the part that makes it beautiful, and that the scary parts in our lives that become something bigger than they are, especially the last week. And the knowledge, I think you kind of alluded to, being the caregiver and the family member, and the knowledge that you have, oh my gosh, of everything that goes on, and the permanent member of the company. That was a great line. And so thank you, Amy. I'm going to have, of course, again, some questions for everybody, but I'm glad that you're here. And this is the first time Amy and I met officially, so it's another awesome moment in the virtual poetry world. And keeping up with that theme of new people, or not new people, familiar people, but new faces, everybody please welcome Ted Morrissey.
Hello, and thank you, Matthew, for everything, including organizing this reading and so on. And thanks everyone who's joining us one way or another. I have to take the opportunity to do a little plugging before I get to my reading, so please forgive me. I live basically in the middle of a cornfield, so having any kind of literary audience is just too much of a temptation to resist. In addition to being a writer and a bunch of other stuff, I'm also a publisher at 12 Winters Press, and our most recent release, just within the last couple of weeks, is a volume by Jennifer Gravely titled The Story I Told My Mother. And I heard Jen read from an essay, which is sort of the foundation of this text, about a decade ago. And I've been harassing her ever since for a complete manuscript. And so she sent me a few months ago this manuscript, which is poems and an essay. And just briefly, this book, The Story I Told My Mother, questions what it means to be the adult daughter of a mother and eventually a daughter without a mother. All right, so that's one of our most recent releases there. I also want to plug a podcast, which I started a few months ago, A Lesson Before Writing. I don't know if Matthew is going to be able to share the link with you, but Google us. You can find us. I co-host it with Brady Harrison and Grant Tracy. Between the three of us, we have about 120 years of experience writing, editing, publishing, and teaching. and we just like hanging out and talking about all that stuff. So we started a podcast a few months ago. It's a monthly podcast. It's available on YouTube and Spotify. But got kind of a cool announcement here. Besides just kind of talking informally about various related topics, each episode we have a featured story that's been recently published in a literary journal. There's just so much great writing going on out there, and so little attention is being paid to it. We're trying to do our part to call a little bit of attention to a great story each episode. We've done stories from Nimrod, from Boulevard, from Sycamore. In October, we're going to do a special Halloween-themed episode of our podcast, and the story that's going to be featured is from The Waiting Room that came out over the summer. But that's all I'm going to say. You're going to have to tune in to find out which story we're going to do. All right. And then very, very quickly, for myself, my most recent book is Delta of Cassiopeia, Collected Stories and Sonnets, and the paperback edition has just come out. In fact, so recently, I don't even have a real copy yet. That's just the proof copy. All right. Thank you for listening to all that. So I'm going to read a very brief, or I think it's a brief, short story. It's going to mix it up a little bit with the poets that I've been listening to, which I really appreciate. So I'm going to end with some prose, though. And the story that Matthew published is part of a forthcoming novel called The Strophes of Job. But I'm not going to read that story, partly because it's a little longer. It also requires me to pronounce German, which would be very bad. So I'm going to read a short story called Lo Ruhama, which is a name in the Bible that means the one without mercy, basically. And so this is from the same novel that's forthcoming next year, but it's shorter than the piece that Matthew published in The Waiting Room. Having grown up on a farm, she knew how an animal was butchered, its limbs cleaved from its trunk, its organs removed one by one, then sorted for their particular use. Sarah's incessant shrieks were performing a special sort of slaughter on her younger sister, Rebecca, who understood that the soul resided in the heart, and that when you die, your heart stops, and your soul flies to heaven or to hell, toward the light or toward the dark. That's how Pastor Wilson always described it. Sarah's unending labor was wrenching Rebecca's soul from her body before killing her, before mercifully halting the beating of her heart. Through the long day, with the winter storm piling snow higher and higher, Rebecca could feel her soul being ripped stitch by stitch from her chest. If only the baby would come and cease her sister's screams. Perhaps Rebecca's soul could be saved, left ragged and bleeding, but still attached by a thread, capable of healing, the way a cut can fuse into a scar, the way a bone can knit itself whole, although it may forever ache with the change of seasons. Rebecca was keeping an eye on her younger siblings while Mama saw to Sarah. It was Mama's baby, or would be as soon as it was born. That was the truth they were to tell. Mama had been sick with the baby, and Sarah was taking her place, cooking and cleaning and caring for her little brothers and sisters. That's why Sarah stopped going to school and no longer attended services and never left the farm. Neither did Mama, who'd become as skinny as a puppet made of sticks. Rebecca had rehearsed the truth so many times she'd begun to believe it. She would be able to recite it without faltering. That would please Mama with her new baby, if it would ever arrive. Rebecca was 14, Sarah was 16, which meant Rebecca was 2 years from her own long, dark agony making Mama a baby. That must be how it worked. Her whole life she had followed in the steps of her sister, like the works inside a clock, Papa said, weaning, walking, talking, reading, bleeding, all right on schedule. There was no avoiding the baby agony that must come before, the ugly act that makes the calves and the foals and the lambs and the puppies and the kittens that must be put in a bag with stones and taken to the lake. Rebecca thought of putting the baby in a bag with stones. The baby who had broken her world, had shattered the piece into pieces. It was a terrible image, the helpless babe in a sack of stones, but she couldn't keep from seeing it. The greater the intensity of her sister's shrieks, the more vividly Rebecca's mind conjured the image. Giving birth was torture, and such a session, like Jesus' whipping at the pillar, was inevitably in Rebecca's future. She had already relocated her siblings to the front parlor, normally reserved for guests, the most regular of whom was Pastor Wilson, but even he hadn't been invited to their home once Sarah's stomach showed, in spite of the pleated dress and the heavy apron she wore without fail. The parlor was the farthest point in the house from Sarah's bedroom, the oppressive sight of her white-hot agony. Rebecca didn't speak to her little sister and brothers about what was happening upstairs in the corner room where Sarah was hidden away with Mama. Rebecca knew that children were afraid and full up with questions, but she couldn't bring herself to talk about it, in part because she only vaguely understood the mechanics of birth herself. Mostly, though, because capturing the situation in words brought it a significant step closer to being her own reality, a concept that went beyond striking her frozen with fear. It touched upon some primal sense of her own mortality. The idea was like a parasite that had taken over her being, a worm that had grown undetected inside her until it suddenly was large enough to dominate her world entirely. Papa wasn't at home. He'd gone on horseback to fetch Mrs. Houndstooth, the midwife, the only outsider brought inside the Johnsons' secret. Papa left in spite of the snowstorm, and in spite of his walking being so whiskey-wobbled, he bumped into the kitchen door frame and stumbled down the snow-packed steps. Papa had never cared for Billy Holcomb, nor any of his clan of reprobates. That's what Papa called them. Rebecca pursued the word in the family Merriam-Webster and decided it meant the Holcombs were good-for-nothings and would go to hell for it. He freely told Sarah his opinion, but didn't put his foot down until it was too late. Rebecca figured Papa's leaving was more about escaping Sarah's screams than seeking Mrs. Houndstooth, and Rebecca envied him. Something crashed upstairs, presumably in Sarah's chamber, and Rebecca was at the edge of shattering too, of exploding into 1,000 pieces like a tree struck by lightning, a thing she'd witnessed once. "I'm going out," she said, "for more wood." Her sister Ellie, 12, looked up from her paper dolls to the fireplace framed in neatly stacked columns of birch logs. Ellie was a mix of Rebecca's meadow green eyes and Sarah's yellow hair, a golden color that attracted boys like bears to honey, Papa always said. Ellie returned her attention to her dollies without a word. The twins were playing jacks and managing to lose themselves in their world of two for a while at least. The snow light from the window combined with the firelight to cast the children in a pall of strangeness. Rebecca pulled on her chore boots next to the side door and her heavy coat. She stepped outdoors into the blissful peace of the raging storm. The log-splitting stump of oak was completely buried, so that Papa's axe appeared to be lodged at a 45-degree angle in the snow. Also buried were the logs waiting to be split. Rebecca took several difficult steps. The snow was so deep it was getting into her boots. The icy wind bit at her cheeks and watered her eyes. She didn't mind. It also drowned out Sarah's anguish. Rebecca looked up at her sister's window, which was a dark square with snow sloping on its sill. No one would have guessed what horror was happening beyond the dull-looking glass. Rebecca had intended to chop wood. The stress of listening to Sarah hour upon hour had kindled something akin to rage, and Rebecca had a feverish need to break something, to destroy something. Now, however, the logs were beneath 2 feet of snow, and a calm had come upon her, though she knew it was temporary. It would only last as long as she could linger outdoors in the storm. Nevertheless, she was drawn to Papa's axe, whose weirdness in the white world was magnetic. She wrapped her frigid fingers around its hard, smooth handle and tried to dislodge it from the oaken stump. She thought of the boy king and the sword in the stone. But the axe didn't budge. Its head was frozen in place. She tried again, harder this time. A hand slipped, and the momentum of her effort threw her off balance, and she fell backward in the snow. She lay in the cold for a moment, surprised. Then some childish part of her brain flickered to life, a part that was silenced when Sarah found she was with child, a revelation that caused everyone's age to advance in a heartbeat. Sarah at 16 was an adult, and Rebecca, the eldest child, all of a sudden responsible for her siblings. Now the caregiver, no longer the cared for. And overnight, Mama and Papa were old. Mama said her hair had turned iron gray and hag thin. Papa had a stoop in his walk, even without whiskey. Like that, they were an age that saddened Rebecca and frightened her and angered her. Rebecca's carefree, childish thinking was a long absent friend who had returned for a brief visit. She began moving her arms and legs to form an angel. She stared at the colorless sky, as snow caught in her lashes, giving the white world a watery look. Rebecca pretended she was at the bottom of a lake, stirring the sandy silt into an angel shape. She held her breath and listened to the smothering sound of falling snow. Unexpected movement in the far corner of her vision returned her to the moment. She sat up and looked at the hen house. "Hello," she said, knowing the word was swallowed by the storm. She used the axe handle to pull herself up, dusting the snow from her coat. She faced the hen house and spoke again. "Hello?" A figure stepped out. He'd been deliberately shielding himself from view. It was Billy Holcomb, wearing a dark coat and a fur hat with ear flaps, giving him a canine appearance. "Hey, Rebecca," he said. His voice quavered. He was cold. He'd been out in the storm a long time. His fur hat was peaked with snow. Rebecca was more than struck dumb. The sight of Billy Holcomb had dashed every thought, the way a fall from a tree can claim your wind and leave you gasping. Rebecca's mind was gasping for words. Finally, "The baby's coming." She looked over her shoulder at Sarah's window. The statement and the gesture were all she could manage in the moment. Her mind had found the image of Billy making Sarah's baby from behind, like dogs in the yard. Billy's hat helped to animate that repulsive picture. Rebecca felt sick thinking which boy in the village would take her in the same beastly way and set her on the path to her own agony. "What do you want?" Rebecca felt her eyes filling with tears, but not wind tears and not tears of sadness. They came with the special rage she earlier felt. She again saw the baby in a bag of stones, the bag dropped in the lake. But it was Billy's hand that did all of that. Rebecca turned and took hold of the axe, giving it a great jerk. Her arms felt as if they may have been wrenched from their sockets. But the frozen blade released from the stump. Rebecca and Billy were equally surprised. She raised the axe and stepped toward Billy. She felt different. She seemed to be watching herself from some vantage point above. Everything was unfolding in this long, unending moment. She recognized the point of view. She was watching herself from Sarah's window. She was Sarah in agony. She swung the axe at Billy, who stumbled backward, his legs stiff from the cold. The axe had struck the henhouse door and dug in there. The surprised chickens flapped and squawked. Billy had fallen in the deep snow and was struggling to get to his feet. It took Rebecca a few seconds to free the axe. She had to put her boot against the door. The axe came loose, but Billy was already in a dead run. His path a line of bruises in the snow, the tail of his coat and his ear flaps jumping with his exaggerated strides. There would be no catching him. Maybe that's what it required to escape the agony, an axe wielded with deadly intent, a heart brimful with wicked thoughts. She wouldn't forget. And she would teach Ellie the way Sarah should have taught her, the way Mama should have taught Sarah. Rebecca was still holding the axe when she saw them coming across the field. The midwife, Mrs. Houndstooth, on horseback, the horse being led by her son Whit. The midwife was dressed in black. She was a shadow against the infinite snow. Her wrap flapped in the wind like the wings of a crow, or an angel of the dark. Papa was not with them. Rebecca propped the axe against the henhouse door and waited in the storm. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. There we go. Thank you, Ted. And remember, everybody, it was at 12 Winters Press, and the link is in I was able to get it in there, Ted. I was able to get the link in the YouTube comment for everybody to click on it. And so listen to it. It's very cool to see. And this is why these events, I think, are so important for not just myself, even though I'm a little bit selfish and they're super important for me. But to meet everybody and to see that there are others, right, where you have the company, you have the podcast, you have the community of writers and artists that we're in contact with, and being able to have these events and have everybody jump in and join, and everybody that's watching and watches in the future, it just grows our community and shows how much we all have in common, how much we're connected, and really makes, I think, hopefully, all the horrible things going on better, I guess. But all right, so everybody on Zoom, I am going to make the screen look like we're all on it. For everybody watching, you're going to look at our Connect screen very quickly, just as a cool
I don't see you, Matthew,
transition.
though.
Here we go. Where am I?
I don't see
I need
you
to-
at all,
Oh,
Matthew.
wait. I know. Hold on. Wait. I did it in the wrong order again. I need to remove my face from this video. Let me do that. Properties. And then I need to bring it here. There we go. I need to remember the order to do it. It always messes me up. But again, remember, everybody watching, if you have any questions, send them our way. I'll ask them. I have the first question. It's a one-parter, but as I was trying to figure out the question, it looks like a three-parter, so I'll just introduce the question for a little bit and then ask it. But for all of you, and while you're writing, and if you bring it into the context of creating a poem or a story, and you're dealing with the situations that arise in the plot and scenes and whatever else, at some point, I think you're faced with an obstacle, some type of opposition, and the answer, it's here. It's just kind of sitting in the back of your head, or your character knows what the answer is, and yet there's something in your heart or somewhere in the makeup and the structure of the piece that you're kind of avoiding. Oh no, no, it has to be the other way. It has to be different. But the work is telling you this is what it is. And when or how do you, the person, the author, the creator, decide, I need to accept it. This is that moment. It's happening, and continue on, finish the work. Like, how do you separate what you want maybe versus what the piece needs as it's been telling you for a while?
I mean, I can answer that. For me, it's like letting go of the ego that comes along sometimes with writing, or how you want to seem, and allowing that space for your art to become what it's meant to become, or write about what it needs to be written about. I know that there's some personal pieces that I've written that I'm developing, but I'm still kind of weary about still sharing it. But I'm a deep believer that if you have the need to write it, if it's coming out, it's because someone needs to read it. And it doesn't matter, like, if you want to like take it like in a creative direction, sometimes it just needs to be said the way it needs to be said. It has to be very straight out sometimes. And I think that that's what I kind of struggle as being a writer sometimes, is that my imagery might not be the same as someone else who's more like, seasoned imagery, and I say things very straightforwardly. But it's just like allowing what I'm trying to say to just kind of flow through me, and not attaching that ego to it.
Go ahead and mutter a little bit about the high school poem, which, I had drafts of that years ago, and just shelved them, thinking this is clunky. There's some lines in there I thought, I really want to use them, but the whole, the narrative was just clunky, and I just revisited it, and did my best to come at it different angles, to make it work. And that was, rewarding for me. I resurrected this clunker from the dead. That's it.
Definitely. And that kind of is in line with what I tell my students all the time is don't throw anything away. Because maybe today it's a clunker, it's awful, you hate it, doesn't work, it doesn't flow, it doesn't do anything, and then a week, a month, 10 years, however long it happens, a perspective, the new angles that you can approach a work or the way that it reads to you now, they're like, oh my gosh, this is it. And then you're able to get it. And like Julia said, in removing the ego. And so I have a question about the ego for everybody. And so you want to get rid of it and say, hey, ego, go take a seat over there. I got work to do. But I guess the question, and maybe some of us have contemplated it a little bit, but where does the ego come from?
I'll jump in here, Matthew, although I don't know that I have a very good answer to your question, but I have thought about that and talked about that with my students and so forth, because I know some really great writers, great poets and essayists and fiction writers who have no interest in publishing their work. They say, and as far as I can tell, it's a true statement because they make no efforts to do this kind of thing. They don't send their work out, but yet they still write, they still are driven to write and so forth. So I think that ego, I don't know if those kind of writers have ego per se. I think if you are trying to share your work and get it out into the public sphere somehow, there must be some element of ego in that. Maybe you feel like you have something to share with the world, or maybe as a reader, you've really benefited from another writer sharing their experience. So maybe you want to kind of pay it forward or something. So anyway, to me, it's interesting that there are really dedicated writers who have no interest in sharing their work with anyone, which I've never understood, but yet there are a lot of them out there.
I'm going to jump in here and add something to that. So I was thinking also with something like my current project, A River Diverted, where I'm working with a story that is someone else's life, right? So it's not my story, it's not my experiences, but yet I know in putting it out there, it has my name attached to it, right? So ultimately, in a way, it does become my vision and how I choose to shape and sculpt that story, if that makes sense. It's sort of like when a director takes on a biopic, I guess. And that movie to some extent still becomes that director's personal vision of that life. I think something I've struggled with this project is kind of like where my ego begins and ends with it, and where River's story just kind of takes over and is what it is. But I think that is an interesting question to think about because, again, every time we put something out there with our name attached to it, I think our ego is going to become part of that in some way.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we can't avoid, as people who are writing to an audience, right? We're reading our stuff like in open mics or right now in this platform, or, some of us, are publishing books and things like that, is that we're going to be perceived a certain way, and having that knowledge sometimes might limit things that we write or don't write, or, poems that need to be said or whatnot. So like, where does the ego come from? I think that it comes from it's a question that begs for some to be seen, as one of the poems was talking about, I think it was Paul's, about this idea of ugly, right? This how ugliness is perceived and how that limits some social interactions and things like that, and limits what's considered that some people are owed because of this. So this idea of ego is something that's very interrelated to the way that how we interact with society and how society sees us.
You know, a lot of the poems that I write, there's not really a me in it that I can identify as me. I mean, the first one about the high school night, night, I didn't want the main character. I wanted him to be, likable and vulnerable, but still, kind of suave, and the way he makes sense of what's happening and all of that. I wanted him to be kind of smart and, kind of a magician and kind of thing. But there was ego in that, because he was kind of a representation of me. There's another, poems I've done, like one that was called Big Fun with Nick and Nellie, and I sent it to a friend of mine who's a poet, and go, "Where's Paul in this? Paul, are you Nick?" No, it's not. It has nothing to do with me, per se. Nothing directly. That I'm not putting myself in there directly. So, I'm safe, to go anywhere I want to go, with the poem. So it's a distinction there.
I wanted to jump in and add something to that too, because it's kind of piggybacking off what you just said, because also some of the early feedback I got on my collection once I did start sending it out. And I had a couple of editors who came back and said, here's the problem we're finding with collection, which is we don't know enough about who this narrator is. Why is this narrator addressing River, and why is that important to him or her? And it was an eye-opener for me, because I was kind of like, well, it's a verse biography. Is it supposed to matter who the narrator is? And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, okay, I think I see what they're driving at here. They want that through line of why this story matters to the narrator. So I ended up having to go back and do some revisions, and really kind of taking that to heart. Why was the story important to me if I'm that narrator? What is there in that for me? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, he and I were of the same generation, so it's kind of this Generation X retrospective, right? Where kind of getting in touch with my own mortality through the life of another individual from my generation. And so I think that kind of helped take the piece to another level that I don't think I would have gotten to without that feedback.
Awesome. So some notes I wrote down. I was thinking about, I guess what this topic is, the intent, and then Linda Raven, like you said, why does it matter? Basically, who cares? At some point, can we have that conversation with somebody? Why are we writing it? Are we writing it for an audience, or like Ted said, for nobody? And is it just for ourselves? And then, like Paul said, are we present in there somewhere? Do we have to be present somewhere? Can we take a step back? And so taking a larger step back for this next question, it's kind of your approach to writing, or your approach to creating in general. And it could be as metaphorical or as not metaphorical as you like. But the question is, do you create easier, I think is a decent word, better in the light or in the dark? And the light and dark can be whatever you want it to be.
Could you say that again, please?
Yes. Do you create easier in the light or in the dark? And then it's kind of metaphorical.
What that brings to mind is because of what I write about is front and center about life and death issues and the worst moments in people's lives and things like that. I have to find a way to be able to get into that, but also then a way to come out. I mean, I'm kind of just taking your light and dark thing, and that what is that by Lorca, the essay Duende, the idea to be grounded, have your feet in the ground, but also don't get too far down in the hole to be able to come up and find some light. And I notice when I listen to other people's poetry in particular, I'm looking for those places of light, because if everything just keeps going down, 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 it's really hard for me to stay with it. But if I can see different places where the light comes through, that's the kind of work I'm attracted to. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm trying to do in my own work. I don't know if that hits on light and dark, but that's what came right to me when you said that.
Absolutely. It reminds me of, and like I said earlier today, sometimes my questions are inspired by the last month or whatever's going on. And earlier this month, and I realized I found myself in the pit, right? You said you find yourself in there, and how far are you going to allow yourself to go in this pit? And what I realized is that sometimes you have to be in that pit. You have to let yourself in the pit, but you know that you're going to climb out at some point. But you got to get in there to realize what's important, reassess and reevaluate. So I think that hits on it very, very closely. And that you said you got to let yourself in there, but then you got to get out. So thank you, Amy. Anybody else before I come up with them? And remember, if you have any questions, shout them out.
I was going to say, I know for myself, I'm thinking, I guess, metaphorically, but I think of the dark place as the place where you're depressed, you're going through crises, everything is wrong in your life. I generally am not productive when I'm going through those kinds of periods. And I do have issues with depression, etc. I know what it's like to go into that dark place, but I am not productive during those times. I can't write. So my productivity comes out of a place of lightness. But what I am able to do, and I think a lot of people can probably relate to this, once there's enough distance between myself and the dark place, I can go back to it. And I can take from that what I need, and I can apply it to what I'm doing in the current state. But I have to be in a good place to be able to be creative.
All right, so my next question is a little, it's more not emotional. Well, it might get emotional. I don't know. They always do. They always get kind of heavy. But this one is kind of like a helium balloon. It's just going to float on out there. But when we're in a situation like this with everybody, we're having a conversation about art, creativity, ourselves, and so on. When the subject of who asks questions, how do we answer questions if we're receiving questions, sometimes we know that the situation or the atmosphere of a conversation kind of lends itself to just this question that exists in the sky. How do you as an individual, maybe, because I know that when a question is asked and when we're in conversations or when someone else is asking questions or answering, our brains they're moving and our thoughts are going and they're going and they're going. How do you decide which answer to give?
The answer that's loudest in the head. And it's so funny because I think that sometimes, people could be asking one question, but something's like weighing heavily on our head or so. So we answer with that perspective in mind. And sometimes not even fully understanding the questions that's being asked, because as I said, what we want to say is the loudest in our head. And I think that sometimes even when we think about our writing based on the prior question that had to do with, like what to do when our art is going one direction, but we really want to pull it somewhere else. It goes along with what is speaking the loudest to us at the moment.
Is sometime what's loudest, do you go, oh no, I can't say that one? All right, so I have one more question for everybody, unless anybody else has something. And this one is, we kind of spoke about it a little bit in our pre-event discussion that we have, and we'll probably discuss a little bit more in our post-event discussion. But what I take the most out of all of these events is being able to, again, sit with people and have discussions that you don't normally get from reading the books or seeing them on social media or whatever else. But when we are, and you, it could be you as a person in your personal life, it could be you as an artist, as a writer, as a creator. But when you're faced with something that is a fight, whether it's the topic you're struggling with in your head, whether it's something that has been kind of clawing at you but you don't want to write about it, whether it's just something in your personal life coming in and you're trying to stand up, how do you continue to fight? I guess that would be the question.
I'll speak to that. I'll turn it over to the other writers. You know, one thing that Nervous Ghost is all about is about art saving lives, right? And sometimes it's those things that we want to keep in the dark, that when we do keep in the dark, that they grow more heavily inside of us, and they keep us down and get in the way of us being able to be loving and kind, and be able to be the type of people we want to be in the world. So like when we're fighting those inner demons of like, do I write about this thing I'm heavily ashamed of, or this thing that occurred, or this thing that's really bothering me about the world? I think it goes back to understanding that we're all living that human experience, and that some of these things that need to be put out there, like some of the things that some of the writers right now read about, and these heavy topics that are so heavy. And I think that that's part of like fighting the fight of like relieving our soul from some of that heaviness. And yeah, I'll just turn it over to the other writers.
I want to know what Paul's cat's name is. Sorry, I took a little detour there.
This is Tallulah. She caught a mouse last night. I mean, I came. Well, I don't want to ramble on too much, but she has me trained to feed her at 5 a.m. every morning. And we don't have a door, going up to the bedroom and stuff. So she's there, and I came down a bit earlier, and I didn't realize right in the doorway of my study here there was a dead mouse. Which she had brought me. And she wasn't there anymore to be acknowledged. But anyway.
Okay, sorry. I just saw her tail.
I fed her then to preclude her coming back later to be fed. But I struggle a lot with discouragement, rejection. I'm not, I still haven't really come to peace with it. I struggle a lot with the aging process, and I'm scared to death of death. I still haven't come to terms with that. So that, kind of keeps, it's a dark force there. And, I've done a bunch of dramatic monologues, like one for really learning about Beethoven, one doing Edgar Allan Poe, Kafka, Heinrich Heine, and then was the time I was going to do one about Martin Luther King. And I got into reading about him and stuff. And I said, man, I'm going to make enemies all over the place if I try to get real about what I'm learning about the guy, what I'm thinking and feeling about the guy. It's untouchable. So it's like, back off, buddy. Go somewhere else, because this ain't going to fly. So I think that's part of the question. It's just like, move on. Because I could not do justice to what I learned about the man, based on all the wokeism and all this, stuff that's going on. But it's just too electric, or too, it's trigger happy. It triggers people too much, and I wasn't going to go there. So it's kind of unfortunate, because I was kind of learning about the guy. I would have liked to have been to do a really honest, deep I mean, I can still do it for myself and not, send it away or anything, but I don't want to spend a lot more time finessing it. So that's that.
And
Julia,
that's so funny. Like,
yeah.
that's so funny because like the whole idea of making people feel uncomfortable and stuff, like I feel sometimes that should be welcomed, because some realities need to be spoken about. Like I'm currently working on a piece that's parallel, like I'm paralleling like Broadway Avenue that's full of rundown trailers with, Figueroa that's, full of prostitutes. And like this idea of this realities are occurring that if you don't live like in the hood, sometimes you don't see that. And so like making people aware of these things are occurring, and these things that sometimes people feel uncomfortable with. I think that it's so important for us to talk about these things because they're shaping like the fabric of how we live and where we live, and all these things are so necessary. So yeah.
So it's interesting that we have two writers who talked about writing about a real person and their life in some way. And I have kind of a project that's a little different in that it's historic photos that I'm obsessed with. And so I keep going back to them all the time. But there isn't a way. I spend a lot of time working with people in town, the different museums, the Historical Society. And I could be a dodge. Maybe, I don't want to do this. And so that's why I'm spending time trying to figure out who the people are. But I thought a lot about it, and it gets to questions about whose perspective are the pieces going to be from? Are they going to be from the individuals in the photographs? Are they going to be from, the nurse that's involved in care of these people during a particular point in time? And I worry about doing justice to the people that I'm not going to be able to find a name for. What happened to them? Maybe there's still family here in town. We're talking about the 20s and 30s, so it's not ancient history. Maybe there's people here that are related to these people. And of course, I want to use the photographs. I don't want to just write the work and not have the photographs. I tried that for a while, sending them out to my writing group. And I said, could I do this without the photographs? And they said, yes, but why would you? I mean, because if you don't have them, and so I'm in a loop on this one about wanting to do this and feeling that it's a way to give voice, but then it's going to be my voice because I don't know what they thought, hoped for, all of that. So I don't know if anybody has any advice, but it lingers with me. I go back to it. I get brave once in a while and do a few things, and then I leave it alone again and go on to other things. So that's my story on the kind of general topic we're talking about.
I'm not sure if I have advice as far as that goes, but the way I think of it is if I'm going to be writing something, and when I feel like I want to give, I want to give, I don't know, credence and I want to honor everybody involved. I imagine if I were the subject matter at some point in a million years and I was a nobody or I was unnamed and I was forgotten, and just being able to know that I existed maybe is enough, could be enough. And that even if I'm not able to name people, I'm not able to give them the light that they deserve, maybe I can create the spark, and then as it moves forward and it grows, there's someone else in the future who can ignite it more and bigger and broader. And so I remember it reminds me of, I think, Sonnet 18 from Shakespeare, and at the end it says, as long as men have eyes and eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee. And so I'm like, if we write about it, it exists and it's real, and then it can inspire or move people forward and bring us together and grow, and we learn about something new, and then we can research and really get into it and grow. I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about. But all right, if we don't have any questions, and I'm out of questions, then I will do my closing. And just remember, I'll leave it open for us a little bit so we can.
I
decompress.
have a question for you,
Yes.
Matthew. How
Sure.
does Nervous Ghost? How did the Nervous Ghost name come about?
So it began in the main idea began in grad school. I was sketching in class, just kind of making a doodle, and it's on the website. The original logo, it looks like a Pac-Man ghost, but has little nervous lines on it. And I didn't have a name for it yet, but it's holding a piece of paper, and on that piece of paper, I wrote on it, digitally or however I did it, was the first poem that I ever read back in 2013, and I was shaking. It was awful. But what I realized, and I always thought, my fears are gone. I overcame my fears. But what I realized is that they're still there, and they're here, and they're behind me, and they're pushing me forward, and they're the motivator, and they're not dead, they're not gone. But I look back and I'm like, you're over there, I'm over here. See ya. And as long as it's like that, I like that relationship with those scary things. And so I realized is that person that I was, that nervous person, it was a ghost now, but it's a ghost that is following me around. And so it kind of became a nervous ghost idea. And then, of course, so many of us have some kind of relationship with that person we were, the person we thought we wanted to be, the ultimate person that we became, who, again, is the person we're supposed to be. And there's that nervousness that we carry, and that the anxiousness that is always around. And we're on the stage and we're talking. And for those 10 minutes, the 5 minutes, it's gone. And I'll deal with you when I walk off the stage and I start crying again. But that's kind of how it came about.
Okay. So you're not going to dress up as a nervous ghost for Halloween this year, are you?
You know what I did? I think 2 years ago, I bought a bed sheet and I cut holes in it, and it was the hardest thing. I couldn't see, but it worked out. One of these days, I'll try and get a mascot suit of the ghost. I think that would be really cool. But
Right on.
all right, so thank you, everybody. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Remember, where is that?
Thank you, oh boy.
Get your copy of The Waiting Room. Check it out. It's pretty cool. And follow us on our social media pages on your screen now. We will see you next time.
Okay, and goodbye, Amy and Linda.